Hi everyone, welcome back to the NSSR. This is your host MÍtalks, once again encouraging you to run your own race to medicine one day at a time. Once again, I have a wonderful guest for you today, and I will let her take it away. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Agnes, and I'm a first-year medical student at Mayo. Just a little bit about myself. I'm from Bloomington, Indiana originally. My parents have lived here now, I think, for like almost 20 years. But I've lived around the US a lot, and I actually went to boarding school in New Hampshire, and I went to college at UC Berkeley. Something a little bit different about myself is I majored in business administration, and I actually worked in management consulting for 2 years before starting at Mayo. And yeah, I'm really excited to be here. Thanks for
Yeah,
having me.
no problem at all. Thank you for being on here. This channel, this initiative wouldn't work without stories like yours, and so I'm always grateful when someone's excited to come on. So, to get started, I would like you to give the viewers a kind of 10,000-foot view of your story. How is it different from the norm?
Yeah, I mean, I think my original path towards medical school was actually really similar to a lot of other people. I started college being pre-med, largely driven by my interest in social impact and wanting to have a job that helped people, and that was like an inherent part of the job. But I think where it kind of started to diverge is when I started becoming interested in business and other things like that.
Yeah.
So really what happened is like my sophomore year, I had worked for a lot of different nonprofits and clinic organizations during my freshman and sophomore year of college, and felt that a lot of them were super inefficient and they could be so much more effective and impactful if they were just managed better financially and just in
Hmm.
terms of organizational management. Because of that, I decided to apply to the business program at Berkeley and ended up really enjoying it and feeling I was learning so much from it, and just pursued it from there.
Digging into your story a little bit, one thing I wanted to ask you was obviously you pursued your interest, but I can only imagine there was some kind of discordance with, thinking about going into medicine and going into this very different major. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, and I think I was kind of in a lucky position in the
Hmm.
sense that at Berkeley, the business major is only your junior and senior year. So you
Okay.
kind of apply your sophomore year, but you're able to have some time to decide. I think the biggest thing that for me that helped me is I wanted to set myself up for success no matter what I wanted to do. So I
Hmm.
think even if I wasn't 100% committed to being a pre-med student or a bio major, during my freshman sophomore year, I was like, I know I need to take these classes in order for that to even be an option. And so I
Right.
kind of stacked my schedule those first 2 years. So then by the time I was taking all my business courses, I only had a few science classes left.
Mm.
And so in terms of academics, I think that was the biggest thing. And it was a bit, it was tough. Like it was a lot of different classes, and obviously it wasn't a very common path, but I think front loading those first 2 years helped me a lot.
Very nice. Another thing that comes to my mind is how did you balance that, front loading your science classes and leaving a little bit at the end with taking the MCAT?
Yeah. So I took the MCAT my senior spring, which was tough. I think a lot of times people have fun during that time.
Yeah,
But I
never.
think there's, yeah, maybe not if you're pre med. But I think for me, there was a few reasons I took it then. One is just within school, you just have so much more structure. And I was really
Hmm.
worried about trying to study during work when your time is really not your own. And then two, by front loading my science classes, my schedule my senior spring was lighter in terms of it was just a lot of business courses, which don't require as much studying as like chem or bio.
Got it.
That being said, like I knew I was at a disadvantage from a lot of other students because I wasn't a bio major. And so I had never taken anatomy, like I hadn't taken a really hard science course in a few semesters. And
Hmm.
so I decided to take one of those MCAT courses, which are like really expensive, but I think really helped me in terms of having an actual instructor walk me through the material.
Can you talk a little bit about your work experience and how that was?
Yeah, so I ended up working at this consulting firm called Bain and Company, and I really loved it. And so I guess, think like stepping back a little bit, I did a junior internship in consulting, and I really loved it. And I think during my senior year, it was kind of, again, this like big question for me, which is like, do I want to like pursue medicine, or do I actually did I find my passion in business, and do I want to stay there? And so I think, again, I was like balancing this, prepping myself for both situations by recruiting in the fall for a business job, but then still taking the MCAT to make sure that medicine was an option. And that's another reason I took it my senior spring. I wanted to take it as late as possible because the MCAT only lasts for 3 years, and I wanted to give myself that time post-graduation to explore that. I ended up deciding to go into consulting for 2 years because, one, I wanted to give myself that time to like really see what the job was like and make an informed decision before I committed to med school.
Right.
And then two, I figured the skills you learn in a job like consulting are so applicable to any situation. And I already knew that if I went into medicine, I'd want to go into health administration or health management. And so I was like, the skills I take from here, I can only be useful moving forward.
Right.
And so, yeah, it was great. I mean, I love Bain. Like, it's a great place, and people there are super nice, and they were very supportive of me, like, applying to medical school, even though that meant I was leaving in a few years. And I think I learned so much. Everything there in consulting is like team-based, and I think that was probably the most valuable thing I learned: how to work in a team, be a good team member, how to manage other people, how to be a good employee. And yeah, I really enjoyed it.
You know, one tip that I give pre-meds is, if you can think of yourself doing anything else other than medicine, it's worth exploring that first before committing to medicine. And I wanted to ask you, you know, would you give the same advice looking back at your story?
Yeah, definitely. Like, I think the last thing, because medicine is such a journey and it's such a commitment. And I think a lot of other jobs are a lot more flexible in terms of switching them around or changing something new. But kind of once you're in med school, it's really hard. I mean, it's still possible, but I just think it's hard to make that change. And so I think, compared to a lot of other people I've talked to, and just even knowing myself coming into med school, I was so much more confident that I'd made the right choice because I had taken that time to explore other things. And kind of like I was saying before, it doesn't mean that I didn't really enjoy my business experience or didn't want to incorporate that into my future job. But at the end of my 2 years, I was like, okay, I know that like this isn't the path I want to pursue for the rest of my life, and I can feel confident moving forward. So I think it's really important, because if medicine's not something I think you can do and not be fully committed to just because it's so hard. And so you don't want to have any regrets about that.
Yeah, I hear that. And one other thing that you actually started to touch on that I wanted to expand on a little bit was, you mentioned the teamwork aspect and how your work taught you that. Is there anything else that your work experience brought into medicine that's helped it go a little smoother for you?
Yeah, I feel like there's so much. I guess maybe I'll give a quick background on what consulting is.
Yeah, go ahead.
It's a fabulous topic. So basically, like, I was in management consulting, and what we do, it is very varied case to case, but you work on a team for 3 to 6 months typically with a company and help them solve a problem. And that can be anything from a huge problem like, oh, we want to completely change our mission and vision and the way we're structured, to a very specific, like, oh, this team, we want to like change the way they spend money, and like, let's address that. So it's very varied. And I work with companies in all different industries. You can work in healthcare. I did education, utilities, stuff like that. And so it feels very separate from medicine, but I think in a lot of ways it's really similar. And so, like I said, one part is a team, and in medicine you work in a team and you have to lead a team, I think, a lot of times as a doctor. And so right. I hope that my experience will help me with that in the future. I think the other thing is communication. And it seems really nebulous, like it seems very obvious, but I think a lot of times, like you said, in undergrad, like, you don't really learn how to work with other people and how to be a good communicator and how to be efficient in that sense. And when you're working in any job, especially something like consulting, which is almost all about communication with your team and your client, you just become a lot better, I think, at expressing yourself and giving feedback and just working with other people in a really good way. And so I think that really helped me too. And then I think the other big thing that was for me is I see a lot of issues in healthcare. I mean, I think everyone does. And I'm really interested in the organizational management side of things. Like, how can we make our hospitals run better? How can we make our medical teams run better? And learning those skills by applying them to other industries or working specific cases focused on that helped me a lot. And so I guess a specific example I'll give is this concept of change management, and how can we help people recognize that they need to have a change in their company, and then get them to buy in and work with them to move that process along so we can make their company or their team work better. And it's really hard to like get people to accept change and to get people to want them from themselves, but you can't have effective change unless they completely buy into it and are part of the process. And I think that's just important for anything. If we want healthcare reform, or even if we just wanted to change one thing at Mayo, for example, like we would need that process. And so some skills like that I think will hopefully be useful in the future.
Aside from the, tactical and the knowledge base things that your job and your experience in general has brought into your medical schooling experience, what like personal changes and maturity, because one thing that happens when I talk to people who've taken gap years, one thing that they always tend to speak to is a sense of maturity walking into medical school. What was that like for you?
I think about it in a few ways. One is just, like you said, inherently working in the real world and stepping outside of school is just a lot harder. And I think you have to mature because you kind of have to learn how to live your own life. And especially in work, like I said before, your time is not your own. And to be able to have the responsibilities of the job and kind of learn to manage that while maintaining your sanity and your mental health and your self-care is really important. And so, for example, my job was quite busy. We worked 60 hours a week, and learning how to like manage that for myself and like what I need to do to be okay and to like bring my best self to work every day, I think is something that's really served me in medical school. When you also have to, I mean, I haven't even done third year yet, but like for anatomy, studying however many hours a day, just knowing like these are my limits, this is when I need to sleep, this is when I need to exercise and eat, and kind of already have that built in because I had to learn that at work, I think helped me a lot. Versus I know a lot of people go straight through school, they're still pulling all-nighters, and that works for them, but it doesn't work for me, and I know that now. So
It stopped working for me literally as soon as I walked into med school.
Yeah, you're like, I'm getting old.
Yeah,
But
it'll age you real quick.
Yeah. And I think that the other thing is, and I know I always bring it back to this team thing, but working with other people is hard. And I think, again, in the real world, you deal with a lot more like real conflict. Like, what if you work with someone every day and you don't get along with them, but they're your supervisor and they're in charge of, your basically your performance,
right?
And what your day-to-day life. Or what if you have a teammate that you don't see eye to eye on, or even like your more uncomfortable workplace dynamics where you're witnessing things that don't feel right, or you feel like there's some injustice and something like that. And I think that becomes so much clearer in the workplace than it does at school, when you're doing your own thing. And sure, you might have a class you don't like, or a group member you don't like, but that's only for a few months or a semester at a time. And so I think it was a hard process for me in terms of learning how to like manage those conflicts and figuring out how I want to approach them. I think I've become a little bit better in terms of like standing up for myself and trying to like provide feedback and find ways to advocate for myself in those situations, but it's still an ongoing process. But again, I think it's good to learn that before you walk into something like medicine or medical school, where it's just moving at such a fast pace. I think sometimes it's harder to like develop those skills.
One thing I wanted to ask too is, say someone is at the beginning of your story and they're picking a major that may be quote unquote unconventional, or they've already kind of progressed in that major and they're thinking, I may want to go into medicine. What would you tell someone like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think what I always try to tell people is, yourself best, and you know what you're capable of handling and what you want to put into this. And so taking like an untraditional path, I think, is harder in terms of just, like, time management, having to manage so many things in terms of class, extracurriculars, whatever you want to do. And even just like grappling with that question for yourself, I think, for a longer time than other people, just makes it a little bit more difficult. But like for me, I felt like I was willing to take on that extra work and that extra burden in order to fully explore like my other interests and make this like informed decision to go to medical school. And so I think in the beginning, though, it's important for that time of self-reflection. Like, if you think being an English major or a computer science major is going to make you fail all your med school classes and or pre-med classes, and it's going to be this like incredibly difficult journey that you're not ready for, then like maybe think about that hard of whether you want to take that on or not. But if you feel like it's worth it for you, then like for sure you should definitely explore your other interests. And I think it just makes you a more interesting and well-rounded and mature person,
Right.
And I think helps you with your journey in the future.
And as you rightly pointed out, a lot of people who work or do something after college sometimes will say, is that a red flag? Is that something that I should be ashamed of? What would you say to such people?
Yeah, I definitely don't think it's something to be ashamed of. I think everyone has their like own journey. And so, there are people in my class who took 10 years off before they went to med school. And there's some people who went straight through. And I think like that's for each individual person to decide. And in terms of like even the application process, like I think if you are authentic and you have a clear reason for what the choices you made, then it doesn't make a difference. I think where it is like a little bit harder is if you're kind of like, oh, I don't know why I took this year off, I just like had no idea what I wanted to do, then yeah, like that makes it a little harder. But if you were making really conscious and informed choices along the way, then it's not the wrong path.
And my last question for you is, say someone heard your story and they really identified with it, or they have more questions and they really want to pick your brain. How do people get in contact with you?
Yeah, I'm always happy to talk to anyone about their med school or business or anything, any questions they might have. And so probably the best way to contact me is through email. So it's lastname.firstname@mayo.edu.
Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to me. Thank you for taking the time to share your story with the world, essentially, because that's YouTube now, right?
Thanks for having me.
No problem. And once again, I am so excited for the things that you're going to do, so excited for the changes that you're going to make. And I'm selfishly excited because I get to say I knew all these people when they were first year med students. Sue me. But I look forward to seeing your journey through medical school and seeing you progress and grow and really morph into this physician that you are definitely going to be. And I think many people are going to be able to say, this is something that inspired them, because a lot of times we don't see these stories, we don't hear enough about them. And that's what this whole channel was built around, is getting people's stories out there so they can see that it is possible to have a not so smooth road and really make it to where you want to be and where you're supposed to be. So thank you once again. Alrighty guys, this has been the NSSR. Again, I'm your host, MÍtalks, and please stay encouraged, stay motivated, and have a wonderful day. Bye guys.